Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the Vibe Daily Chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast. It is day 82 of our devoted series, our year-long series as we walk through the entire Bible from cover to cover. And we continue here through the book of 1 Samuel this week. And I am so excited to be joined again by my wife, Victoria, as we will close out this week with 4 more chapters of reading here in 1 Samuel. And we're just going to jump right in. So left off with David being anointed the next king of Israel, and then ultimately spending some time with the current king of Israel, Saul, in his court, and Saul kind of becoming fond of David. And verse 17, we start to really get into a little bit more of David's story here. So 1 Samuel 17, maybe top 3, top 5 most well-known stories in all of the Bible. Just like transcends culture, transcends Christianity. Again, don't even have to be a Christian to probably know the legend of this story, which becomes David versus this Philistine giant named Goliath. I'm just curious, in this time, as you read through it, what was interesting or jumped out to you about this account?
You forgot to mention this is Noah's favorite.
This is our son Noah. It's his favorite story ever. I am grateful he now prefers David over Goliath, because there's a time that Goliath was his favorite, but now he likes David and he wants to be David. So
and now Jojo, the 2-year-old, he's Goliath today. He told me he was Goliath.
Oh, well,
and
that doesn't surprise me in the least bit.
But this is a good story, and I think for me the significance of Gath kind of came out again, because remember in Joshua chapter 11 verse 22, the only descendants of Amalek, not the only, well, some of the descendants of not Amalek, Anak, the giants, they were left, that what's his name, Caleb didn't take out, because Caleb took out some of those. There was 3 cities that they were left in, but he had destroyed the rest of them. And so it was Gath, Gaza, and Ashdod that they were left in, those descendants were. And so here we see that Goliath, one of the giants, is here in Gath remaining. So I love the connection between the book of Joshua and here in this 1 Samuel now, where you're seeing some secret. See, I was going to try and say this word because I was going to get it wrong. I don't know. S-Y-N-C.
Sync?
Yeah, syncrecy. Syncrecy. Is that a word? See, I was going to leave it alone. I need to leave it alone.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know what word you're trying to go.
I don't know where I'm going with that, but they're aligning.
Okay. That word works. That word works. Yeah. I think, you have been, to me, leaving us breadcrumbs about Gath since Joshua. You've been talking about.
Listen, it's so fascinating.
Trying to lead us all the way to Goliath. You've been thinking about Goliath for books now. I
can't help myself.
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of David and Goliath in this house, so that makes sense. But yeah, it's. I can't recall now if that was Joshua or actually, I think this was Joshua, where God kind of says, like, they will be a thorn in your side, right? Like these cities that you left, like they will be a thorn. And we're seeing that. Like, we're seeing that literally. They are a nuisance and they keep rising up. We saw that in Judges over and over again. We see it here again in 1 Samuel, that like the people that they're constantly fighting against and is constantly opposing them are essentially the towns and the cities that they left behind.
Yeah, which makes me think, of how many of them are there? Because I thought we just beat the Philistines or the the Amalekites and or the Moabites, and I'm just like, wait, how? Like, you just defeated them. Why are there still so many left?
Yeah, well, I mean, we just saw this recently. They left the ones that were good, right? Saul didn't get rid of everybody. He kept the ones that were good or seemed like they were worth something. So that seemed to be a common thing, that the Israelites weren't really getting rid of everybody. So
That's true.
yeah. But yeah, man, he's massive, right? He's 9 feet tall, which, I mean, can't imagine. I think the tallest person in the world is probably 7 something, right? So like, he's even bigger than that. 9 feet is an incredible height. But like, I thought what's so interesting is that like the Philistine or Goliath's challenge was less about even the people, but more about God.
Yeah.
Right? Like, his opposition was also to the God of Israel, more so than just the people of Israel. And so, it's so interesting because we've talked a little bit about Saul and his really fear or his submitting to the people rather than to God, and just that contrast to even like his own son Jonathan, or what we'll see here in David. But like, he should have had all the confidence in the world to go against Goliath. But instead, I mean, 40 days, this man would come back every day and challenge the people. And nobody had the courage to step up on behalf of God. And I just think that's just crazy to me, that every morning and evening for 40 days, he would just keep doing it over and over again.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned it before, but like, Saul should have been the first one up against him because he was the tallest. He was head and shoulders taller than everyone else in the ranks, and you are the leader and the king. And so like, you should have been the first one up for this challenge. But he wasn't. But which shocked me is when I saw in verse 22 that David left his things in charge of the keeper of the baggage, and he ran to the ranks. And so in my other version says that he ran to the front line, and I was like, well, how much courage do you have to just, oh, here, take my stuff and just run into the battlefield, right? Like, just run into battle with no sword and no armor or anything, right? And so I do even see there, like, he is fearless. Like, he really is fearless here, where he is just like, I'm just gonna be in this battlefield with all these soldiers and be like, what's up, guys? What's happening?
Yeah, valiant warrior. We've talked about that, right? He was built for this, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting, like, all of the things Saul was willing to offer to whoever would step up in his place, though.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'll give you my daughter. You ain't got to pay taxes. Like, just anything. Just somebody, please step up and beat this Philistine. That, like, I'll give you all these things. And, David asks about those things, which... just to kind of to know what it is. But ultimately, I mean, his motivation is what we've been saying all along. He knows that it's not his battle, but it's God's, right? And that who he is disrespecting is not even Israel. It's Israel's God. And that gives him, similar to Jonathan, it gives him enough courage to go up against this Philistine.
Yeah, I love the questioning. Like, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine trying to defy, the armies of the living God? And so I love that his perspective was always about God. It was always like, who is this defying our God? Yeah. And who does he think he is?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I do love how, though it's kind of like a foreshadow in verse 38, where Saul clothed David with his armor. And put his, like, helmet of bronze on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail and straps his sword over his shoulder and stuff like that. And to me, it was just like, yeah, he put his king's armor on David, not knowing that David was going to be king, right? And so I feel like that was a foreshadow of him like giving over the kingdomship, or the kingdomship being placed onto David.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. He don't even know. He don't even know. He just like, this guy is literally going to take his spot. Now, I mean, he will know soon enough because he realizes people gonna start, really being a fan of David. But, yeah, I mean, I thereafter, obviously, Goliath feels extremely disrespected that David comes before him. I mean, it's just so rude that I'm a dog, that you came at me with sticks. Like, it's so disrespectful. But I do think it's interesting that, like, he actually curses David by his own gods. Right? And then David goes after him and says, "But I come to you and then against you in the name of the Lord of armies." Like Goliath tried, to kind of curse him by his gods. It obviously did nothing. Did nothing. Because then when David comes after him with, Israel's God, man, it takes one smooth stone.
Yes.
Like, just one. And, yeah, I mean, I just think it's so crazy that you just, again, it feels a lot like Moses versus Pharaoh, that it's just like my God versus your gods, quote unquote. And that every time our God's gonna win.
Yeah, and I love how it's on this same theme though. That we kind of mentioned yesterday was like, God doesn't need a lot of people, and He doesn't need a lot of like armor and weapons. And so like here, David mentions in verse 47, he's like, but I love this back in 46 that he loves. It's like, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and all the assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear.
Yeah.
And so I love that. Like, he's like, okay, this right here, what I'm about to do is for God's glory, so that everybody will know. But also that at this point, David gets it. Like, we don't need an army.
Right.
We don't need swords and spears. Like, the very thing that Saul continues to go after is lots of people in his army and, armor and, all that stuff. Like, David's already understood, like, my God doesn't need any of that. Like, but I'm still going to take you out and feed all of your bodies to the birds. Yeah. Just so you know. And I will take off your head. Yeah. Just as a quick foreshadow for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's so good. Just what he acknowledges, and again, just that difference. We'll probably spend a lot of time again just contrasting David versus Saul, but like, yeah, he clearly gets it, and just understands that. And maybe it's from that personal experience that he talks about with the lions and those that came after his lambs and things of that nature. But like, hey, he clearly gets it. I will say, it's always interesting. You gave the foreshadow about kind of taking Goliath's head and it becomes like a trophy essentially because he puts it in his own tent, which is weird. But, I think it's funny speaking about, again, being a popular story for our kids that like that part of the story. My kids know it, which, sometimes I'm kind of like, all right, that seems a little graphic, but they do know that part. But like, I do love that. There's one kid show I think that does it hilarious because at the end, like that part's ready to come and they're just like, yeah, let's just cut out.
Oh yeah. They're like,
let's just get out of the story before we get too graphic. But yeah, I think that part of it, growing up at least as a kid, I don't remember them talking about that part.
They didn't.
Like, it wasn't until I read it for myself that I was like, wait, there's more to this. He doesn't just knock him down; he goes and cuts his head off and. That's a little graphic, David.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been on multiple Bible story cartoons right now for the kids. We're like, I think we were sitting there, we're like, wait, what? Wait, what? They tell the kids this part? Yeah. Now, back in our day, they wouldn't have done that.
They stopped it at the point that he fell. And that was the end of the story.
The end.
Yes.
And he's king.
Right. Yeah, they skip ahead that. Yeah, but... I mean, that's actually a good point and even a good transition as we get to 18, because like ultimately this battle like propels David into just like the popularity of the people. The people love it. I mean, it's part of what ultimately upsets Saul is that, you know, they say David has killed 10,000s, but Saul has only killed thousands. But I think it's a good call out to just point out that back in chapter 16, like David is anointed king, but David is still not king yet.
Nope.
Right? Like we're going to get chapters here of David still being up under King Saul, because Saul is still the king. And it's just so, you know, it's one of the stories that I often refer to when we just talk about like how God can really, you know, speak something over you or declare something, give you a promise, anoint you even for a purpose, and it still take time to fulfill that. Like it still take time for you to actually walk in that and see that, or see it come to pass. Because I mean, it's over a decade that David is on the run from Saul and like under Saul and all that kind of stuff, before he actually fulfills to sit in that. Now, he operates like a king. Like he still operates like God is anointing is with him. And he is, but I do think it's just so interesting that like, even though we get that back in 16, it's going to be a while until we actually see him walk into that position. But Saul immediately feels threatened right here in 18. Yeah, what were some things that just jumped out to you as we kind of move through David and Saul's relationship?
Yeah, I think also in verse 4, when Jonathan.
There you go.
There we go. At some point I was going to get the right person. Took his robes off and his armor and his sword and his bow and his belt and has put it on David. And so it was even like anointing him as prince right now. Like in the meantime though, like you're a prince. And so, so I think that was really interesting that he did that. And the other thing I thought was interesting was this fear that Saul kept having about David. And so we know that like we've seen in the past that like, you know, there's been nuggets dropped on like David or somebody's going to be coming to, you know, take over your throne, or God's chosen another person. And so when Saul sees that the Lord is with David, and he recognizes that the Lord is not with him, like in verse 12, well, verse 9, it says Saul eyed David from that day on with that song. He's like, hold on, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And then verse 12, it says that he was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. And then in verse 14, it said, David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him.
Yeah.
And so even like some of these actions that you see of Saul that's happening is like this fear of like, oh, this is happening. Like what Samuel was saying, like, I'm actually really seeing this. Like the Lord is not with me, because he said when he called out to the Lord earlier for battle, like the Lord did not answer him.
Yeah.
But yet now it's kind of like him looking at the person that he knows is going to overtake his throne. And there is this fear.
Yeah. That's a good point. Like, I think it is important to just kind of keep in mind that you're right. He was warned that this was happening. Like, this jealousy isn't coming from nowhere. Like, it's not like he's making up stuff like, oh, I think David might be taking my place. Like, no, Samuel clearly told him this is what the Lord said is going to happen. And so that's a good call out there, that's he does start to see that. But as you said, it's really God's favor on him that he's most jealous of.
Yeah.
Right. And God being with him. Like, because again, on the surface, Saul is bigger, stronger, older, you know.
Yeah.
But it's the favor, and that favor is being reflected. Even the people are starting to see that themselves, which is interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say, you know, what jumps out to me in 18 is that like we have that evil spirit again that's kind of sent by God, that as you mentioned earlier, you kind of called it like his bipolar behavior, essentially, that was starting to happen. But like, yeah, that evil spirit motivates him to even try to kill David. I think it makes some of the Psalms make more sense though, because David writes a lot of these Psalms with like this idea of, God, how much longer will my enemies come after me? Yeah. But it's very interesting that like the enemy's almost coming after them because of God, right? Because God's the one that sends that evil spirit to Saul. That ultimately motivates Saul to go after David. So like, but I mean, he spares David's life. Like, David lives, and he's able to get away. But I wonder if in this process there's something God's even trying to teach David,
right?
Throughout this like running from Saul and always kind of being on edge, that God's also trying to teach David something in that process.
Yeah, definitely. I love how Saul also is like trying to like pin the Philistines on David now at this point, where he's like, let not my hand be upon him, but although you just tried to kill him literally with your spear, but he's like, well, now since that's not working, let me let the Philistines like take him out, so or my daughter be a snare for him. So part of me was like, so what was going on with Michael? Like, what was up with her? Like why he was like, yeah, that daughter. Let me give him that daughter, so that she could be a snare for him. And but later on we do see that she has like household gods and stuff and idols, and so I don't know what her character was like. Well, we kind of get a glimpse of her character later, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is interesting because it feels as if, as you said, like some of what Saul did for David was, I'm gonna say like empty. That's not the best word, but like that it always had like an angle to it.
Yeah.
Right. Like, even the way they present it is just like, yeah, you should be the king's son-in-law. Like, you should be his relative because he cares for you. But ultimately, like, it was an angle. It was about a trap, or it was about trying to get him sent somewhere to, you said, let the Philistines be ahead of him. Like, it was just very interesting. But ultimately, all of it just continues to lead to more and more hatred, right? Like, it's Saul, verse 28 says, Saul realized that the Lord was with David and that his daughter Michal loved him. And he became even more afraid of David.
Right.
And as a result, Saul was David's enemy from then on. Like, even when he tried to make work against David, like, Michal just ends up loving David more than Saul. Like, Jonathan loves David more than Saul. Like, it's like he can't even get his own kids to be on his side. And ultimately that just leads to more hatred and more distrust. So yeah, it seemed like he had this angle for everything he did. Even the stuff that seemed like it was supposed to be nice ultimately had ill will kind of behind it.
Yeah, I just love David's posture in all of this. It was like really humble. Like does this seem like a little thing to y'all, just to be like the king's son? Like, no, like, I'm a poor man and I have no reputation. And I'm just like, you kind of have a reputation now, but just still, like, this, like, who am I to be the son-in-law of the king?
Yeah, it's good. Well, as we'll see again, the common theme over the next few chapters, in chapter 19, Saul again goes after David. And so, it kind of ends at the end of 18 with, again, like, pretty much Saul's going to be David's enemy from then on. But he even tries to get his own son, Jonathan, who happens to be David's like best friend, to go after David. So what was interesting to you here in 19?
Yeah, I love that Jonathan went on behalf of David to try and like, dissuade his dad from like, Dad, he's done all these great things for you. Like, he's making you look good. Like, but the funny thing to me is in verse 6, where like, Saul swears, right? He says, as the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death. And he still tries. Like, he eventually still tries. And so the one moment he swears not to kill him, then by verse 10, And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear. Like, we only took 4 verses later.
Yeah.
4 verses later before he's actually trying to kill him again. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's so good, and I appreciate you bringing it up earlier because I think it helps to see this. But I do think we see the spiritual warfare in effect in Saul's life and how it is manifesting itself as, I think you called it bipolar, but like or schizophrenic. I mean, either one. Like, it really is. It feels like he has mental health issues.
Yeah.
Because he goes from loving David to trying to kill David in a matter of verses over and over again in these chapters. And I think it's important to call that out because even if you'll see that in like Jesus' ministry, like oftentimes spiritual warfare or spiritual attacks or demons and being tormented manifests itself in what looks like a mental illness.
Exactly.
And I think, like I said, it's important. I think it's interesting. I'm going to say important, but it's definitely very interesting that they keep pointing out this spirit. Like the writers here keep pointing out that there's this spirit that keeps, this evil spirit that keeps bothering Saul over and over again in these chapters. And it's like shortly after that spirit that he does something outrageous, trying to go after David. So like I said, yeah, it's only a couple verses, but it's because of this spirit. Verse 9, right? You said verse 6 is when he says something about like, I swear. In verse 10, he's trying to pin him, but in verse 9 in between that is when that evil spirit comes to him, right?
Yeah.
And it's like that's where that shift happens every time there's this evil spirit, and it leads to that behavior.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you for pointing out that verse 9 too.
Yeah. But I mean, David has all the people on his side. Jonathan's on his side. Michael's on his side, or Michal. I don't never say his daughter's name correctly, but everybody's trying to help him escape, and so you know he's on the run here. Anything else kind of before we get to chapter 20 that you thought was interesting here before we get to even Jonathan protecting him ultimately?
I love that David escaped to Samuel.
Yeah, that's where he went to.
Because he could have went back home. He could have went somewhere else. But he went to the man of God who anointed him. And we have this whole like prophesying thing that happens here. So I do think that like even where Samuel was it was the right place. This is where the Spirit of God was. Like it was so strong here that like there was this like covering.
Yeah.
Like even Saul and all his men, you know, couldn't pass the Spirit of God. They just kept getting wrapped up in it.
Yeah.
So, and once again, it's just this worship, this prophesying, all of this.
Yeah. It's just I feel for Saul, man. He's so tormented, like back and forth, right? And just what he feels. But like, I mean, it all started ultimately when he is rejected, you know, by God. And how that really begins that journey of, sometimes God is with me and sometimes he is not.
Yeah.
And that sounds terrible.
It does.
Yeah. All right, but we get to our last chapter kind of for this week and today's reading, chapter 20. And to continue this theme, there's all these people looking out for David.
Yeah.
And his best friend kind of steps up in this case. Talk to me about chapter 20. What stuck out to you about this story?
Well, for the first thing that stuck out was that when David flees, he tries to tell Jonathan. Jonathan has like no clue. So I'm like, oh, this time Saul left Jonathan out because he does not go back and tell him what he has just done.
Yeah.
And so like Jonathan is like even in disbelief and has to do this whole like test to even see if this is true. Because once again, last time Jonathan talked to his dad about this, his dad swore to him
that he would never hurt him.
he wouldn't do this. So, so he's kind of like, what? But yeah, he's escaped, or David's escaped, and he goes and talks to him. I do love that Jonathan sits opposite of King Saul at this table, and Abner, who we found out earlier was his cousin, right? Like his cousin sits beside him, but David's place was empty. But just knowing that, like, how close in proximity David was to the king at this table, that, like, he would notice, and he was worried about his spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just love, in general, again, just the brotherhood. I think it's easy to know when, like, something's just not right. And I feel like Jonathan just knows that what his father is trying to do is just not right. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that, like, he's not willing to just kind of go through it. And there's a part of me that, like, even going back to what we talked about earlier, I mean, Jonathan has to also know that David is being groomed for the next king, right? Like, that's his spot, you know? Like, yet he could have very easily been with his father, but like, yeah, let's take this David guy out, because if he's gone, like, that's my spot, right? I'm next in line.
Yeah.
But he just knew what his father was trying to do just wasn't right. And even knowing, and I would say, again, just probably having the insight that David is being groomed to take a spot that he could see as his own. Not just the righteousness of it, but his love for David,
right?
You know, was enough for him to do the right thing over and over again.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when the verse 31 talking about this kingdomship thing, where, like, Jonathan would be next, because I think Saul even says it. He's like, for as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established.
Yeah.
And so he's like trying to tell him, like, as long as he lives, like, you're not gonna be king.
Yeah. Like, he calls it out.
He does. Which is actually what happens, though, right?
Yeah. That's good. That verse didn't even stick out to me until you just said that.
Yeah.
That, like, he very much verbalizes that exact thought.
And Jonathan's like, so what?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Like, why should he be put together?
Because he hasn't done anything.
What has he done?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Man, it's so good. Because I just said, to me, it's just challenging. I'm always trying to apply it. And, like, I just feel like, it's not worth it. It's not worth the position. It's not worth the authority, the title, the whatever, if I have to do something unrighteous to get there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, if I got to cut a corner, if I got to cheat my way, if I got to step on top of somebody else that didn't deserve it, right? Like, it's not worth it.
No.
And I think that's what it comes down to, which is, it's interesting because we'll get to it later next week. But, like, David does a very similar thing. Like, this back to your point about, like, their hearts being so similar, because David has a similar choice with Saul.
Yeah.
Like, and he makes the righteous choice, not the choice that will get him to kingship sooner, right? And I'm like, dang, that's so challenging.
It is.
To have so much integrity and desire to do the right thing in every situation, even when it may result in you losing that seat or losing that position or losing that title.
No, it is. It is.
Any other themes? Anything else in 20 that just stuck out to you? I mean, just summarize the story again. Like, they come up with this whole plan with arrows and all this other stuff that kind of lets David know when he's to be able to free and to go, and it's all these other things that are there. But any other themes or big ideas that jumped out to you in 20?
Not much. Probably just how much they did care for each other. Like, Jonathan and David, this whole, like, departing, like, it was heartbreaking for both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, so we're not done with David and Saul and Jonathan. There's a lot of back and forth here that we'll get in 1 Samuel, but we will finish the book of 1 Samuel next week, and so I pray that you'll come back and join us then as we conclude that book and get into 2 Samuel, all in next week. But until then, thanks again for joining us this week for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. We appreciate it and look forward to seeing you on Monday.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.